Now, we're talking about the life of Joseph. Now remember, the life of Joseph started when he was a child, obviously. He was born at a very early age, as the saying goes. And as he got older, he grew. That's how life is. But he had these dreams. Remember the dreams? And it was about the sheaves out in the field bowing down, the sheaves that represented his brothers and his mother and father bowing down to his sheep, right? And he had the dream of the sun, moon, and stars bowing down and worshiping him. Remember, he was sharing the dreams with his brothers, and of course they didn't like the connotation of the dream. And so they decided, when he was sent by his father out into the field, to find them, that they were going to kill him. And the one brother intervened and said, let's not kill him, let's just put him in this pit here. And then, as it turned out, the Ishmaelites were coming by and they sold him to the Ishmaelites. Remember the story? And the Ishmaelites took him and they sold him into Potiphar's house. And at Potiphar's house he was such a great worker that he was made the head of all of the servants of Potiphar. But Potiphar's wife had taken a shine, shall we say, to Joseph. And she kept saying to him, why don't you come and lie with me? And he said, no, no, no. And then one day when he was in the home alone with her, she said that to him and he said no. And she grabbed his coat and took his coat. Right? And then when her husband came home, she said, look what you've done. You brought this Hebrew into our house to embarrass me. And he tried to attack me, to rape me. And so Potiphar, believing his wife, took and had him sold or sent into prison. And he ended up in Pharaoh's prison. And so that's basically where we pick up the story. The life of Joseph in prison. By the way, the passages of the story start in Genesis 33 is where we start. Okay? And we're going to pick it up at, I got a big book here, so we'll pick it up in Genesis, 39. We'll pick it up near the end of the chapter.
Chapter 39?
39, we'll pick it up at verse 19 of 39. And this is where Potiphar sends him into the prison. It says in verse 19 of 39, it says, and it came to pass that when his master heard the words of his wife, which she spake unto him, saying, after this manner did thy servant to me, that his wrath was kindled. And Joseph the master took him and put him into prison, a place where the king's prisoners were bound, and he was there in the prison. But the Lord was with Joseph. Okay, now, everything we're talking about is that the Lord is with Joseph, and you know what? The Lord, what does Jesus promise? I will never leave you nor forsake you. Right? Jesus said, if I go away, I will send the Comforter to you who will be with you, right? To reveal all truth to you. So, the Holy Spirit dwells with us. The presence of God is with us. And it says, but the Lord was with Joseph and showed him mercy and gave him favor in the sight of the keeper of the prison. And the keeper of the prison committed to Joseph's hand all the prisoners that were in the prison. And whatsoever they did there, he was the doer of it. Now it's important that we understand that, because sometimes we have the idea that, he was languishing away in prison and he was just laying there waiting for God to do something. Sometimes that's sort of the idea we have about waiting for something that God's spoken into our life. Well, God, I'm just going to go and I'm just going to go home and I'm going to lay on my bed. And when you need me, when you've decided when you're ready to use me, here I am. And here we see, and it's interesting what it says. It says that he was the doer of it. Now, you remember in the New Testament, what does it say? That we're supposed to be doers of the work and not hearers only. Deceiving our own selves. Right? That's how we end up not accomplishing God's will, is we deceive ourselves by being a hearer and not being a doer. Okay? And so whatsoever they did there, Joseph was the doer of it, and the keeper of the prison looked not to anything that was under his hand, because the Lord was with him, and that which he did, the Lord made it to prosper. Wherever you are, that's the plan of God. It's like, you know what, if you're the garbage collector on the street, be the best garbage collector on the street. So everybody says when you're sent to a different route or something, oh man, we had the best garbage man, now we got to teach somebody else, right? If you were like Randy, a postman, be the best postman. Have everybody want to know you, everybody be happy about the way their mail's delivered. Whatever it is you're doing, that's the whole point of this, is do it as if this was the fulfillment of the calling of God on your life. God may have called you to be a missionary to Africa, but you're not there. And instead, you're down working at Tim Hortons, washing the pots and making coffee and selling people. Do the making of coffee and the selling of donuts with the same zeal that you would do if you were out on the mission field preaching the gospel. Because to God, it's the same thing. Okay? And then we pick it up in Genesis 40, verse 1. And it came to pass after these things that the butler of the king of Egypt and his baker had offended their lord the king of Egypt. And Pharaoh was wroth against two of his officers, against the chief of the butlers and against the chief of the bakers. And he put them in ward in the house of the captain of the guard, into the prison, the place where Joseph was bound. Isn't that amazing? Not by chance these things happen. And the captain of the guard charged Joseph with them, and he served them, and they continued a season in ward. And they dreamed a dream, both of them, each man his dream, in one night, each man according to the interpretation of his dream, the butler and the baker of the king of Egypt, which were bound in the prison. And Joseph came in unto them in the morning, and looked upon them, and behold, they were sad. And he asked Pharaoh's officers that were with him in the ward of the Lord's house, saying, Wherefore look you so sad today? And they said unto him, We have dreamed a dream, and there is no interpreter of it. And Joseph said unto them, Do not interpretations belong to God? Tell me them, I pray you. And the chief butler told his dream to Joseph. And he said to him, In my dream, behold, a vine was before me, and in the vine were 3 branches, and it was as though it budded, and her blossoms shot forth, and the clusters thereof brought forth ripe grapes. And Pharaoh's cup was in my hand, and I took the grapes, and I pressed them into Pharaoh's cup, and I gave the cup into Pharaoh's hand. And Joseph said unto him, This is the interpretation of it. The 3 branches are 3 days. Yet within 3 days shall Pharaoh lift up thine head, and restore thee unto thy place, and thou shalt deliver Pharaoh's cup into his hand, after the former manner, when thou wast his butler. But think on me, when it shall be well with thee, and show kindness, I pray thee, unto me, and make mention of me unto Pharaoh, and bring me out of this house. For indeed I was stolen away out of the land of the Hebrews, and here also have I done nothing that thou should put me into this dungeon. And when the chief baker saw that the interpretation was good, he said unto Joseph, I also was in my dream, and behold, I had 3 white baskets on my head. And in the uppermost baskets there was all manner of baker meats for Pharaoh, and the birds did eat them out of the basket upon my head. And Joseph answered and said, This is the interpretation thereof. The 3 baskets are 3 days. Yet within 3 days shall Pharaoh lift up thy head from off thee, and shall hang thee on a tree, and the birds shall eat thy flesh from off thee. And it came to pass the 3rd day, which was Pharaoh's birthday, that he made a feast unto all his servants, and he lifted up the head of the chief butler and of the chief baker upon his servants. And he restored the chief butler unto his butlership, and he gave the cup into Pharaoh's hand. But he hanged the chief baker, as Joseph had interpreted to them. Yet did not the chief butler remember Joseph, but forgot him. Now, it's a great story. And if you've been following along the story, you know there's something that God is doing here, right? And there's nothing that Joseph can do. Even here, he makes an appeal to the butler. When you get up there, you're handing the cup to Pharaoh. Just say, hey, there's this guy down in the prison, whatever. Put in a good word for him. Get me out of this place, right? He didn't want to be in prison. But when Butler was restored to Pharaoh, he forgot all about Joseph. Now, it's interesting because what's happening here is that God is perfecting in Joseph something for a greater purpose. You might get halfway through your life and think, wow, I know this would be a great purpose for my life, but it's not the purpose that God has for you. And so you're still anxious and worried and everything about it. But God has a greater purpose. And here's something you need to keep in mind. In Hebrews 5, I'm reading 12 to 14, it says, For the time you ought to be teachers, you have need that one teach you again, which be the first principles of the oracles of God, and have become such as have need of milk, and not of strong meat. For everyone that uses milk is unskillful in the word of righteousness, for he is a babe. Did you get that? For he that uses milk is unskillful in the word of righteousness, for he is a babe. Now, Jesus, if you remember, when Jesus met the woman at the well, and she was there to get water, and the disciples had gone away and they came back and he's having this conversation and everything. One of the things that happens in the story is interesting. It says, the disciples came to Jesus and said, they wondered, has somebody else brought Jesus something to eat and to drink? Remember, because they had gone away to get food while he was there at the well. And Jesus said to them, and it's important you write this down, my meat, there's the word meat, remember, because the difference between milk as babes and meat as in adults is this. My meat is to do the will of him who sent me. The difference between being a baby is hearing versus doing, which is what a mature person does. The milk of the word is the basic principles about forgiveness and the things that we talk about, love and all those things. But the meat of the word is getting out there and doing the work. Right? So we got that theme recurring here. Remember it said in the last passage, and all that happened in the prison was done when Joseph was the doer of it. He wasn't sitting around there going, well, let me tell you some great stories from my life as a kid back in where I come from. Let me tell you some dreams I had. That's what it was he was doing. He was diligently doing the will of God. Now, the next verse is important. It says, but strong meat belongeth to them that are of full age, even to those who by reason of use have their senses exercised to discern both good and evil. Right? God is creating an amazing thing in Joseph's life, and it's happening because Joseph, in all the turmoil and struggles he's in, he is using the giftings that God has given him that they might be perfected in him, that he would be ready to fulfill the call of God when he comes to that point in his life. Remember we talked last week and the week before about you need to find what it is that you do? It may be hospitality. Don't let anybody tell you it's not important. You may be the person who is the best person at bringing hospitality. Do it as if it's what God has called you to do with all your heart. You may be a giver. If you're a giver, then let God continue to bless you that you can just find ways to give into people's lives. You may be a preacher, right? You'll find, if you're a preacher, I may never invite you to the front here, but you will still find a place to preach because God will always open up an opportunity. You may preach at Tim Hortons. You may preach at Gore Park. You may preach at Jackson Square. You may preach when you're at your family gathering. You'll find a way to preach because it's what God is perfecting in you. You may say, I'm a teacher. If you're a teacher, you're going to teach. Not only are you going to teach, you're going to teach all kinds of things. You're going to teach the Word of God. You're going to teach people. Everything you've taken in your that is of any value, you're going to teach to people. Because the whole nature within you is to teach. And God is going to perfect in you being a teacher. That's just the way it is. And so whether God calls you to be work here or work there or work here, whatever you're doing, that will be the thing that God is working and perfecting in you. Right? But strong meat belongeth to them, and that's Hebrews 5:14. But strong meat belongeth to them that are of full age, even those who by reason of use have their senses exercised, and there's that exercising unto godliness, to discern both good and evil. Genesis 41, verse 1. And it came to pass, at the end of 2 full years, it's like that? Just went by like that. 2 years. And where is Joseph? Well, Joseph is in the jail being the doer of it. That's what he's doing. He's serving and encouraging and being the guy that's responsible to his master in the prison, and he's doing a great job. And it came to pass that after 2 full years that Pharaoh dreamed a dream, and behold, he stood by the river, and behold, there came up out of the river 7 well-favored kine, or cows, and fat-fleshed, and they fed in a meadow. And behold, 7 other cows came up after them out of the river, ill-favored and lean flesh, and stood by the other kind upon the brink of the river. And the ill-favored and unfleshed cows did eat up the 7 well-favored cows, and so Pharaoh awoke. And he slept and dreamed a second time, and behold, 7 ears of corn came up upon one stalk, rank and good. And behold, 7 thin ears, and blasted with the east wind, sprung up after them. And the 7 thin ears devoured the 7 rank and full ears. And Pharaoh awoke, and behold, it was a dream. And it came to pass in the morning that his spirit was troubled, and he sent and called for the magicians of Egypt, and they, all the wise men thereof. And Pharaoh told them his dream, but there was none that could interpret it unto Pharaoh. And then, see how God's timing. God used Joseph to release the butler, and now God is using the butler to release Joseph. Then spake the chief butler unto Pharaoh, saying, I do remember my faults this day. Pharaoh was wroth with the servants, and put me in ward in the captain of the guard's house, both me and the chief baker. And we dreamed a dream in one night, and I and he, and we dreamed each man according to the interpretation of his dream. And there was there with us a young man, a Hebrew, servant to the captain of the guard. And we told him, and he interpreted to us our dreams. To each man according to his dreams did he interpret. Now, I want you to think about this. It didn't make any difference to the baker or the butler that their dream was interpreted. I want you to think about that, because it was going to happen anyway. The dream only revealed to them what was going to happen. They didn't have any power to change it. The butler couldn't change it, the baker couldn't change it, but they had a dream. The purpose for them having a dream wasn't for them. The purpose for them having the dream was that Joseph could interpret it. And the reason for Joseph interpreting it was so that when the time was right, the butler could share with Pharaoh that there was someone, a man of God in prison, who knew how to interpret the dream. Do you understand what I mean? Because the baker and butler couldn't change their situation. So telling them their dream was like, okay, now I know what's going to happen to me, but I still can't change it. Right? I can't get out of here, or I can't save myself. Whatever the Pharaoh decides to do is going to happen. All that's different is now I know what's going to happen to me. But now we have a situation where Pharaoh has received a dream and he can't interpret it. And because of this gifting that was used, because of how he was faithful where he was, now God is ready to put him in a position where he can change. I want you to think about this. He can change the whole world. Egypt was the most powerful nation on the planet in those days. This was like the superpower. And the leader of the superpower has a revelation and doesn't understand it, and he's going to call on this person who is in prison to come and reveal the plan of God. This is great. And that says, and it came to pass, as he interpreted to us, so it was. Me he restored unto mine office, and him he hanged. And Pharaoh sent and called Joseph, and they brought him hastily out of the dungeon. And he shaved himself and changed his raiment and came in unto Pharaoh. And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, I have dreamed a dream, and there is none that can interpret it. And I have heard say of thee that thou canst understand a dream to interpret it. And Joseph answered Pharaoh, saying, It is not in me. God shall give Pharaoh an answer of peace. Right? And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, I have in my dream, behold, I stood upon the bank of the river. And he tells him the dreams again. We can read them, but we won't. We'll make it shorter. And Joseph said unto Pharaoh, verse 25. The dream of Pharaoh is one dream. And God has showed Pharaoh what he is to do about it. The 7 good kine are 7 years, and the 7 good ears are 7 years. The dream is one. And the 7 thin and ill-favored kine that came up after them are 7 years. And the 7 empty ears blasted with the east wind shall be 7 years of famine. And this is the thing which I have spoken unto Pharaoh. What God is about to do, he showeth unto Pharaoh. Behold, there shall come 7 years of great plenty throughout the land of Egypt. And there shall arise after them 7 years of famine. And all the plenty shall be forgotten in the land of Egypt, and the famine shall consume the land. And the plenty shall not be known in the land by reason of the famine following, for it shall be very grievous. And for that the dream was doubled unto Pharaoh twice. It is because the thing is established by God, and God will shortly bring it to pass. Wow. Now therefore let Pharaoh look out a man discreet and wise, and set him over the land of Egypt. And let Pharaoh do this, and let him appoint officers over the land, and take up the fifth part of the land of Egypt in the 7 plenteous years, and let them gather all the food of these good years that come, and lay up corn under the hand of Pharaoh, and let them keep food in the cities, and that food shall be for store for the land against the 7 years of famine, which shall be in the land of Egypt, that the land perish not through the famine. And the thing was good in the eyes of Pharaoh, and in the eyes of all his servants. And Pharaoh said unto his servants, Can we find such a one as this, a man in whom the Spirit of God is? And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, For as much as God hath showed thee all this, there is none so discreet and wise as thou art. Thou shalt be over my house, and according unto thy word shall all the people be ruled. Only in the throne will I be greater than thou. And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, See, I have set thee over all the land of Egypt. Can't you just imagine? Can't you just imagine that the decree gets written and sent out, and Potiphar's thinking, uh-oh, I hope this guy is a nice guy. Right? Right? Everybody who's done anything to Joseph, all of a sudden they're thinking, man, I hope this guy is a gracious and loving and forgiving individual. Right? And of course he was. Right? And Pharaoh took off his ring from his hand, and he put it on Joseph's hand. Now, interesting, that ring thing. That appears often in Scripture. I'm not going to talk about it today, but you might want to, as you're reading, think about the ring from Pharaoh's hand. Right? Remember, the ring is in the story of the prodigal son. The father takes the ring off his hand and puts it on him. Bring the best robe, put it on my son, and the ring, and all the significance of that. And so we see it happening here, that God is honoring Joseph in an amazing way, an amazing position. And in verse 43 it says, And he made him to ride in the second chariot which he had. And they cried before him, Bow the knee, and he made him ruler over all the land of Egypt. And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, I am Pharaoh, and without thee shall no man lift up his hand or foot in all the land of Egypt. I think that's a fulfillment of the dreams that Joseph had when he was a child. Not only was it a fulfillment, it was the very fact that Joseph began to hear from God in dreams was the very vehicle God used to use him mightily. I want you to think about how many people's lives were saved and transformed by the fact that Joseph was a diligent servant, by the fact that he was willing to be used. All those people who normally would have starved in Egypt now were preserved because Joseph had done the will of God. Pharaoh got to hear the counsel and advice of God that without Joseph he probably would never have heard. And so we see the importance of him doing that. And then of course in Genesis 42, we're not going to go into the rest of the story. Suffice it to say that in Genesis 42 it talks about how Jacob saw that there was corn in Egypt. The famine had spread through the whole land. And even where Joseph's family had come from, there was no food to eat there, and so they came to Egypt to buy food. And the story's a long one, through many different steps, and that the brothers and the father are restored to Joseph, and in the story we see that they bow down before him as that second to Pharaoh only in all the land of Egypt. Okay?